My great-grandfather served in World War II. His name was Jack Agnew, and he served in the 101st Airborne with the Dirty Dozen, or the Filthy 13. There's a movie, like a Hollywood movie about them. They're the guys with the mohawks and the face paint, the Native American face paint. And I'll watch like a YouTube video on like the history of the 101st or Normandy or something, and I'll make a little comment, talking about my great grandfather. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, you don't have any proof that he's your great grandfather. You don't have any proof of this or that. You don't know what you're talking about." Well, he is my great grandfather, and I have some pictures, and so here he is. This was this paper was for his funeral. Here he was, during the war when he got older. You can kind of see. But I have some more pictures. There he is right there on the end in the 101st insignias. There's again in his red beret. I got one more of him, a closer up. There he is. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is I wanted to talk about my great grandfather, not only for the the heroic aspects of his service, but also what happened after the war and how it affected our family. And so first, I guess we could talk about what he did in the war. He immigrated from Ireland, and I think he was born in 1922. So he was probably, when he joined the military, he's probably 21 or 22 years old when he actually fought in combat. And he wanted to be a pilot, and so he was going to go to Canada to join their flight school, so he'd go over and fly with the Canadians. But I guess for whatever reason he got caught up in the paratroopers, and I think it's because he had experience with airplanes. And so I think his first combat deployment, his first combat jump was actually in Normandy, and their job was to jump in before the invasion on the night of June the 5th, and their mission was to blow up all the different bridges so the Germans couldn't bring in reinforcements, and just to secure the invasion. And they would go around planting explosives and just their job was to just cause a bunch of mayhem. And these guys were the rowdiest of them all. They had the crazy face paint, the mohawks, always getting into fights, always doing crazy stuff. They're called the Dirty Dozen, Filthy 13, because they wouldn't wash their uniforms. Kind of crazy, cowboy type guys, and their job was just cause as much mayhem behind the enemy lines as possible. And they sure did. When they jumped out of the plane, I think a few of them died like right away, like jumping out of the plane. I know at the end of the war, I think 12 guys jumped out of the plane and only 4 made it home. I could be wrong, but I only remember hearing about 4 guys that returned home out of 12 or 13 guys. And so the war, especially for them, they got up close and personal with people. They would see people's eyes when they would kill them. Hand-to-hand combat with knives, with pistols, with all kinds of stuff, and it's just very brutal, and it's very traumatic for my great grandfather. There's this one story I hear, of they're walking across a river, a creek bed, and there's a unconscious German soldier. He's unconscious. He's in the riverbed, and the fellow soldiers he was with convinced him to shoot him, like peer pressure. Like, oh, do this, peer pressure into shooting him. And my great grandfather did, and I guess it just really stayed with him forever. He killed a non-combatant basically, and just the guilt of it ate him up inside. And he saw his best friend get run over by a tank and squished, and it's just I cannot imagine seeing a lot of these things. And he got covered in shrapnel, and his body was like broken in so many places. And when he jumped out of the plane, hit the ground, his shoulder popped out of his socket, and he had to pop his shoulder back, and he just brutalized his body during the war. And just the amount of intense pain and suffering he had to go through physically and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually too. He was a man of faith, and he I guess he had some issues in his spiritual life later on, because he just had this profound sense of guilt of maybe God couldn't forgive him for what he did, or maybe he was having trouble with that. And at that time, PTSD was, I wouldn't say it wasn't known about, because even in World War I, they would talk about shell shock, but it wasn't seen, the same way as it is today. There wasn't really a treatment for it. And, when he came back from the war, he would have these, traumatic episodes of where he would freak out, and he would hit, my grandmother, his daughter, not because he wanted to, just because his brain would just go into a different place. And it just added a lot of pain and suffering for my grandma, a lot of emotional turmoil, and that passed down to my mother, and it passed down to me. And I'm hoping I'm far enough removed that I can kind of overcome a lot of the stuff that my family has been dealing with because of the war, because of the things my great grandfather had to go through. And as a kid, I knew him as a kid. He died when I was 8 or 9, and I remember him opening up the closet of his bedroom. He pulls out his M1, his 1911. He's got these like golden plates he stole from Hitler's Eagle's Nest. And, as a kid, as a young boy, you're like, man, this is the coolest thing ever. My great-grandfather, he was a war hero. He was this. He was like the baddest guy in the war. He fought for the United States, the good guys. He fought against Hitler. He fought against evil. And I was like, oh, man, this is just the coolest thing ever. And I remember thinking, I'm like, my great-grandfather is like, he's a hero. He's a warrior. He's just all around like this amazing person. I had this really romantic view of him. And as a little kid, it's like, after he died, I started hearing more about the things that he did, and I was like, wow. And he really inspired me to wanting to become a Marine, or in the Army, either one of those two. I wanted to do what he did. I wanted to go to war. I wanted to fight. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to follow him. I admired him, and I'm named after him. His name was Jack. My name is Jack too. I kind of figured, that's what I got to do, and I'm so thankful that I wasn't able to. I'm completely deaf in my left ear, and that kept me out of the Marine Corps, kept me out of the Army. And I knew if I went in, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fight. I wanted to go to war, and I don't want that anymore. And the reason why is because the amount of damage it causes to a person and to your soul and to a family, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. And I will always remember my great-grandfather as a hero, but I will always remember the lesson of You know, don't get suckered into going into war. Don't get suckered into trauma. You know, maybe think about taking up a certain job, maybe as like a policeman or a soldier or a fireman or a paramedic. You know, those are very honorable and needed jobs, but you know, think about, you know, if you are to have children, if you are to, you know, pass on your legacy, you know, how that might affect that, you know, having to deal with trauma. And you know, different people handle it differently. I have a coworker who's seen a lot of horrible things, you know, in the third world, and during, you know, the Civil War, he would see people, you know, burned alive and people killed and all that. And you know, and when I talk to him, he's always happy. He's always full of joy. And I asked him, because I was wondering, like, my great grandfather, he saw all these things, and I was thinking, you know, you just kind of, the trauma is just inevitable, and the anger and the guilt and all these things is just inevitable. You know, he saw all these things too, and I asked him, like, well, how come you're not like my great grandfather? How come you're not freaking out and having all these, you know, like all these psychological attacks? And he says, you know, I can choose to let those things go, and I can choose to still be happy even though I saw those things. And you know, when we do experience trauma, you know, it's inevitable, and I think it's better to pick the side of, you know, it's better, you know, you have a choice. You know, you can choose to accept what you saw and what you did, and try to come back from it. And then for other people, it just breaks them, and it just carries on into their family. And yeah, all that if anyone's watching this, I just hope I hope the main thing that you take away from this is, you know, don't go seeking to traumatize yourself, because it doesn't only affect you, it affects your family down the line. Thank you for watching.